From parking lot confrontations to hurricane defiance, some people's sense of superiority leads them down dangerous paths. Today, we're analyzing 5 cases where entitled behavior had deadly consequences that no one could have predicted. It was March 15, 2017, in Clearwater, Florida, when late afternoon heat reached 89 degrees as shoppers crowded a suburban shopping center parking lot near the main highway. Brenda Caldwell, 42, arrived alone in her white Mercedes shortly after 3 o'clock. A real estate agent known locally for her aggressive negotiating style, she had spent the morning showing properties across Pinellas County. Witnesses later described her appearing visibly irritated as she circled the lot, leaning on her horn when cars hesitated at intersections. After several minutes, she pulled into an open space near the front walkway. Less than 30 feet away, near a concrete service wall beside a dumpster enclosure, a disheveled man sat on the ground, speaking quietly to himself. Several shoppers passed him without stopping. Brenda exited her vehicle and immediately noticed the man. Surveillance footage later showed her pausing beside her door, watching him for several seconds before walking in his direction rather than toward the store. As she approached, the man stood and began slowly walking past her toward the sidewalk. His posture was unsteady and his movements suggested intoxication. When he gestured in her direction, possibly asking for money, Brenda stopped in front of him. Witnesses reported that her voice quickly rose as she pointed toward the service area and began gesturing sharply. Several nearby shoppers turned to look. Security footage showed her stepping into his path, blocking him from continuing toward the sidewalk. The man attempted to move around her, but she followed. Continuing to gesture and wave her arms, she raised a phone as if preparing to call someone, then stepped closer, forcing him backward toward the parking spaces. As the confrontation drew attention, 2 bystanders later stated that Brenda appeared increasingly agitated, pacing and pointing while continuing to block the man's movement. The man's body language shifted as he backed away, keeping his hands close to his chest and glancing toward the exit lane. Instead of disengaging, Brenda advanced again. Surveillance showed her stepping off the curb into the parking lane, heels unstable on the uneven pavement. The concrete parking barrier behind her sat less than 2 feet away, marking the edge of the walkway. When the man attempted to move past her one final time, Brenda lunged forward and shoved him with both hands in the chest. The shove forced the man backward several steps. As he regained his balance, he extended his arms and pushed back in what investigators later classified as a reflexive defensive movement. The contact itself was not forceful, but Brenda had already been leaning forward in unstable footwear. The return push caused her to lose balance. Her left heel caught the raised edge of the concrete parking barrier behind her. With no space to recover, she fell backward violently. Her head struck the corner of the barrier before her body collapsed onto the asphalt. The man froze briefly, then fled across the driving lane and disappeared into traffic. Brenda remained motionless on the pavement. Blood began pooling beneath the back of her head as shoppers slowly approached. Several minutes passed before emergency services were called. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but pronounced her dead at the scene. Police later recovered surveillance footage from several parking lot cameras. The recording showed Brenda stepping into the driving lane, blocking the man's path, and initiating the physical contact moments before the fall. Investigators interviewed 5 witnesses who confirmed that she had escalated the confrontation and shoved first. The man's return push was classified as a defensive reflex rather than an assault. The medical examiner later ruled the manner of death accidental, concluding the fatal injury resulted from the fall. The unidentified man was never located. Detectives closed the case without filing charges. Brenda's confrontation had ended in tragedy on the hot asphalt, but across the country in Austin, Texas, a claims adjuster was about to learn that demanding answers during emergencies could create a crisis of her own. It was September 14, 2019 in Plano, Texas. The afternoon temperature had reached 85 degrees as parents gathered at the community park for the Under-12 Soccer League championship game between 2 local teams. Michelle Torres was 38 years old and worked in corporate HR, spending her days filing complaints about workplace policies and investigating employee grievances. She had developed a reputation among the soccer parents for confronting coaches and referees about what she perceived as unfair treatment of her son, who typically spent most games on the bench. The game was in the second half when Michelle's son received a yellow card for a rough tackle that sent an opposing player to the ground. Michelle immediately abandoned her lawn chair and stormed onto the field, disrupting active play. She marched directly toward the referee, gesturing angrily about the unfairness of the call. The referee blew his whistle to stop play as Michelle began making loud accusations about biased officiating and favoritism toward the opposing team. Michelle demanded that the yellow card be reversed and threatened to report the referee to league officials. Other parents began shouting for her to leave the field as coaches from both teams stepped in to block her path and calm the situation. She refused to comply and continued shouting accusations about biased officiating and discrimination against her son. The referee attempted to restart play. Michelle positioned herself directly in front of him, preventing the game from continuing. A league official arrived and instructed her to return to the sidelines immediately. Instead, Michelle escalated further, accusing the league of corruption and threatening lawsuits while gesturing aggressively in the heat. Several parents began recording as her behavior drew the attention of spectators across the field. After several minutes, 2 coaches escorted her off the field toward the parking lot. She continued shouting as she walked, repeatedly turning back toward the field and pointing at the officials while arguing with staff members. Once in the parking area, Michelle broke away from the staff and continued yelling toward the field, pacing between rows of parked cars as traffic moved through the crowded lot. Several parents later said she ignored repeated warnings to step out of the driving lane. Still shouting and pointing back toward the field, Michelle walked directly into an active traffic lane without checking for vehicles. A sport utility vehicle had already begun reversing out of a nearby parking space. The driver had no opportunity to stop before Michelle stepped directly behind the moving vehicle. The rear bumper struck her and knocked her to the pavement. As she fell, one of the rear tires rolled over her upper torso. Bystanders screamed as the driver immediately braked and exited the vehicle. Michelle lay unresponsive on the asphalt as several parents rushed forward and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes and attempted resuscitation, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death to be fatal crush injuries to the chest and abdomen with massive internal bleeding. Surveillance footage and witness statements confirmed that Michelle had walked into the driving lane while distracted and that the vehicle had been moving at low speed. Investigators ruled the death accidental. The driver was not charged. The championship game was canceled and the field was cleared as parents led the young players away from the scene. The case was formally closed several weeks later. In the next case, entitlement would not unfold on a field or in a parking lot, but behind the closed doors of a luxury spa, where ignoring a simple safety warning would quietly turn deadly. It was August 11, 2018, at a luxury hotel spa in Scottsdale, Arizona, where afternoon temperatures climbed past 105 degrees as guests moved between shaded courtyards and air-conditioned treatment rooms. Inside the resort's wellness complex, private hydrotherapy suites lined a quiet hallway reserved for premium clients who had booked extended packages costing several $100s per session. Becca Stewart, 46, had arrived alone that morning after checking into the hotel for a weekend stay. A regional sales manager known among co-workers and service staff for demanding special accommodations, she had booked the spa's longest private hydrotherapy session, insisting on the highest temperature setting and additional time beyond the standard reservation. Employees later stated that from the beginning of her appointment, Becca complained repeatedly about scheduling limits and water temperature, arguing that the price she had paid entitled her to unrestricted access. Staff documented that she requested the tub be raised to the maximum allowable heat and repeatedly reset the wall-mounted mechanical jet timer to keep the session running beyond its scheduled limit. The private suite contained a deep stone hot tub set to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the highest temperature permitted under state health regulations. A wall-mounted timer and intercom system allowed attendants to monitor session length and check on guests without entering the room. After 40 minutes, an attendant contacted Becca through the intercom and informed her that her scheduled time had ended and she needed to exit the tub and cool down before her next treatment. Becca refused, stating that she had paid for the room and would leave when she was finished. The attendant reminded her that prolonged immersion at that temperature could be dangerous and offered water and assistance. Becca declined both. 10 minutes later, staff contacted her again after noticing the session timer had been manually restarted. Becca again refused to exit, stating that the spa's time limits were unreasonable and that she would be filing a complaint with hotel management. The attendant documented that Becca sounded agitated and insisted she was feeling fine. At the 50-minute mark, another check-in was attempted. This time, Becca did not respond immediately. When she answered, her speech was slower, and she complained that the room felt too cold, requesting the water remain at its current setting. Surveillance cameras in the hallway later showed no staff entering the suite during the next 15 minutes. Inside the private tub, prolonged exposure to near-scalding water had begun lowering Becca's blood pressure while raising her core body temperature. The heat caused progressive dizziness, dehydration, and confusion. At approximately 1 hour and 10 minutes into the session, spa records indicated the intercom went unanswered. An attendant opened the suite door and found Becca slumped sideways in the tub, her face partially submerged and her body motionless. Steam filled the small room, and the water continued circulating at full temperature. Staff immediately shut off the jets and pulled her head above the surface while calling emergency services. Hotel security arrived within minutes and assisted with removing her from the tub and beginning CPR. Paramedics reached the spa shortly afterward and attempted advanced resuscitation, but Becca showed no signs of breathing or pulse. She was transported to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead less than an hour later. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death to be accidental drowning, with hyperthermia and prolonged hot tub immersion listed as contributing factors. Toxicology tests showed no alcohol or drugs in her system. There were no signs of trauma, restraint, or mechanical failure. Investigators reviewed spa records, surveillance footage, and staff statements. Documentation confirmed that the hot tub temperature remained within legal limits and that employees had warned Becca multiple times to exit the tub and cool down. The intercom logs showed she had deliberately restarted the session timer and refused assistance. The spa was cleared of wrongdoing. In the final report, investigators concluded that Becca lost consciousness from heat exposure and low blood pressure, slipped beneath the water's surface, and drowned before anyone noticed. Her death was ruled accidental. The hotel temporarily closed the hydrotherapy wing for inspection and later added stricter automatic shutoff systems to prevent extended private use. If you're enjoying these stories of entitled behavior gone wrong, make sure to subscribe for more shocking cases that'll leave you speechless. It was November 8, 2015, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, when a large retail store filled with evening shoppers taking advantage of weekday sales. Customer service lines stretched toward the entrance as employees processed returns, exchanges, and price adjustments under bright fluorescent lighting. Carol Turner, 47, arrived at the store shortly after leaving work. She managed the downtown branch of a regional bank where she had spent more than a decade overseeing customer disputes and enforcing compliance policies. Co-workers later described her as meticulous and confrontational, known for documenting minor procedural mistakes and escalating small issues into formal complaints. In her neighborhood and workplace, she developed a reputation for inserting herself into conflicts and pursuing grievances until supervisors or management personally addressed her concerns. Carol had brought with her a decorative lamp she had purchased 3 weeks earlier and now wanted to return. At the customer service counter, she was assisted by a 19-year-old part-time employee assigned to handle evening returns. Store records later identified him as a college student working his first retail job. He examined the lamp and requested her receipt, explaining that returns older than 2 weeks required proof of purchase under store policy. Carol immediately objected, stating that longtime customers should not be required to present receipts. When the employee explained that the system could not locate transactions without documentation, she insisted that the policy be ignored and the return processed manually. As the line behind her grew, the employee offered to contact a supervisor for approval. Carol refused to wait. Witnesses later stated that her voice rose as she accused the employee of incompetence and deliberate obstruction. When he attempted to step away toward the manager's office, she followed. The employee moved quickly through a swinging door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and entered the stockroom area. Carol ignored the warning sign and pushed through the door behind him. Inside the stockroom, narrow aisles ran between tall shelving racks stacked with boxed electronics and small appliances awaiting inventory. Surveillance footage later showed Carol following the employee down the aisle, continuing to gesture and block his path as he tried to move toward the back office. Near the end of the aisle, Carol stopped beside a tall mobile shelving rack and leaned her body against the metal frame as she continued confronting him. The shelving unit stood more than 8 feet high and had been designed to remain movable during stocking operations. It was not anchored to the floor and relied on weight distribution to remain balanced. As Carol pressed her weight forward, the top-heavy rack began to shift. The employee stepped away when he noticed the movement. Carol continued leaning against the frame, unaware that the rack's center of gravity had already moved past its balance point. Seconds later, the shelving tipped forward. The metal structure and dozens of heavy boxes collapsed onto Carol, pinning her to the concrete floor beneath the full weight of the rack and its contents. Store employees rushed into the aisle and attempted to lift the shelving, but the load was too heavy to move by hand. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and used hydraulic lifting equipment to free her from beneath the rack. Carol was barely conscious when she was removed, breathing shallowly and showing signs of severe chest compression. Paramedics provided oxygen and intravenous fluids and transported her to a nearby trauma center for emergency treatment. Doctors later determined that she had suffered extensive internal injuries, including lung contusions and internal bleeding caused by prolonged compression of her chest and abdomen. Despite emergency surgery and intensive care, her condition continued to deteriorate. She died later that night from complications related to crush asphyxia and internal hemorrhage. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death traumatic crush asphyxia with delayed respiratory failure following thoracic compression. There were no signs of blunt force trauma, defensive injuries, or pre-existing medical conditions. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage and employee statements, confirming that Carol had entered a restricted stockroom area and leaned her body weight against the unanchored shelving immediately before it tipped. A safety inspection found no mechanical defects or load violations. Her death was ruled accidental. No criminal charges were filed. The case was closed 3 weeks later. Carol's pursuit into the stockroom had ended in crushing tragedy. Yet down in Louisiana's coastal region, an elementary school teacher was preparing to challenge nature itself, convinced that expertise meant nothing compared to her online research. It was October 2017, along a low-lying stretch of Louisiana's Gulf Coast, as hurricane warnings were issued for several coastal communities ahead of a powerful Category 3 storm moving north from the open Gulf. Local officials ordered a mandatory evacuation for Barrier Island neighborhoods and beachfront rental zones expected to face life-threatening storm surge. Kimberly Stone, 48, was staying alone in a rented beachfront house while preparing lesson plans for the upcoming school week. A third-grade teacher known among parents for strict classroom rules and frequent policy emails, she had recently become active in online groups that questioned emergency forecasts and evacuation orders, viewing them as government overreach designed to control the public. When local authorities announced the mandatory evacuation, Kimberly decided to remain behind and document what she believed was an exaggerated storm for her social media followers. That morning, emergency personnel went door to door conducting final evacuation checks. When officers arrived at her house, Kimberly confronted them on her porch and demanded to know what authority allowed them to order her to leave her own property. She accused them of spreading fear and insisted the storm was being overstated. The officers informed her that they were not authorized to force anyone to evacuate, but warned that once winds reached dangerous levels, all emergency services would be suspended and no rescue crews would return to the area. Kimberly dismissed the warning, stating that she had the right to remain and would not be forced out of her rental. By early afternoon, the weather remained deceptively calm. Kimberly recorded videos from her covered porch overlooking the Gulf, pointing out the light wind and moderate waves as proof that evacuation orders were unnecessary. She described the storm as political fear-mongering and criticized neighbors who had already left. By early evening, the outer rain bands reached the coast, bringing heavy downpours and gusting winds. Kimberly moved inside but continued recording from her living room, acknowledging the conditions were worsening while insisting the forecasts had been exaggerated. As night fell, sustained tropical storm force winds battered the house. Power failed shortly after sunset. Outside, water from the rising tide began spreading across the beach and into nearby streets. Shortly before midnight, the storm made its closest approach to the coast. Storm surge pushed seawater inland, flooding the ground level of beachfront homes within minutes. Water began seeping under Kimberly's doors and rising across the floor. She continued recording as the water climbed past her ankles, then her knees. Furniture shifted as the current strengthened. Within half an hour, the surge had risen to waist-deep, then chest-deep, filling the living room with fast-moving water. When Kimberly attempted to reach the front door, debris from neighboring properties had jammed it shut. The back exit was already submerged and blocked by floating furniture. A strong surge wave knocked her off balance and forced her against a couch as water continued rising around her. Unable to regain her footing in the current, she was pushed beneath the surface and drowned inside the flooded house. Search and rescue teams reached the area 2 days later after the storm had passed and floodwaters receded. Kimberly's body was found inside the living room of the destroyed rental property. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be drowning due to hurricane storm surge. Investigators later reviewed her social media recordings, which documented her refusal to evacuate and her presence inside the house as floodwaters rose. The death was ruled accidental. No charges were filed, and the case was closed after authorities concluded that she had knowingly ignored a mandatory evacuation order and remained in a high-risk coastal zone during the storm. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.